So, and I'd like to turn to our next speaker, who's JC Sekar. JC is the co-founder and CEO of Accuzen Technologies in Singapore. JC, can I hand over to you, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you to UNIDO for this opportunity to present here. I think I was a part of the very first session. I was part of the event last year, and I was also part of the very first session during this webinar series. I think we talked about resilience, which was the first topic, and I think I'd like to continue. And I must say that things have changed in the last 6 months or so since we first got online. And I think I've also learned a fair bit since the last event. So I'm not repeating what I said the last time, but I want to build on some of the things that I said the last time. I actually want to start off with a little bit of a poll. I would have done this if you have been face-to-face, but if you have a handphone handy, if you can just scan the QR code, I want to start off by asking you to give me a very simple answer to this question. Do you agree that safety is the absence of incidents or accidents? Just scan the QR code. It should open up a simple button of yes, no. I'll give you 30 seconds. Shouldn't take that long. Yeah, I think. I know this is a snap poll, but I just want to have a quick sense of what the audience thinks. Okay, I'll give it another 10 seconds. Okay, so a majority seem to believe that safety is not the absence of incidents or accidents, so which is good for me because I'm probably trying to preach to the core because that's going to be my first premise about saying that safety is not the absence of incidents or accidents. And I argue and say that it's the presence of what I call as the 3 C's, which is capacity, controls, and competency. I'm going to deep dive into each of these in just a moment, starting with capacity. So what do we mean with capacity? I think we've all gone through the storm now, and I think I like the palm tree because the palm tree really is one which kind of resonates, and when there's a storm, it really can swing back into action. So we need to all be like that palm tree and see how we can essentially swing back when there is some kind of a storm that hits you. And it comes to really about having the necessary resources in terms of money, manpower, machine, material, and methods, because these are all the strengths, these are all the stressors that are going to be on the capacity. And if we don't have enough of them to withstand a shock, then our resilience is under question. So I think the first C that we need to worry about is capacity. So capacity addressing all these fronts, and there are going to be changes in all of these things. There could be a relocation of manpower, there could be an allocation of resources, there could be change in materials and methods because of situations like what we've just faced. So these are all going to be, creating some degree of shock, and we need to have that capacity to withstand that. If that capacity is lacking, there is certainly going to be some impact on safety. The second C, which one of my favorites, is really about controls. We talked about an incident, but an incident doesn't happen just like that. An incident happens because there was an exposure to a hazard, and that hazard, because of the incident, you probably have a consequence. And obviously, there is a probability and a severity associated with these. And you will be having more of these, but for the fact that you actually have controls in place. You have controls to essentially mitigate those hazards. You have controls in the event you have a hazard. You don't want that hazard to get converted into an incident. And even if you do have an incident, you have the necessary controls to see that the consequence is minimized. So that's how you really operate Safety 101. So what you see on the right side is probably what you have had as an accident or an incident, or those statistics or those lagging indicators. But the reality is it's not because they are all there, but it's all depends on the existence of the controls, and that's going to make a big difference. So the second C that you need to worry about is the existence of controls, because if we lack those controls, yes, you're not going to have safety. The third C, again, something I'm extremely passionate about, is competency. The question we've got to ask ourselves is, do we have adequate risk competency at all levels in the organization? And when I say all levels, it's at the management level, it's at the leadership level, and it's at the level of the operator who's kind of in the front end. We need to have competency at all levels. And I think this is something which we don't pay enough attention to, and this is my honest submission. So I'm going to talk very briefly about what we've done in Accuzen and together with some of our clients to talk about how we actually uncover those insights. I'm going to swing a little bit into an example where, I'm going to open up an app. So this is how an organization an individual within an organization could be looking at how their competencies. This is just an example. So let's say this guy is in the construction industry and he wants to understand the risks, that whether he really understands the risks. So he has some questions which he takes as part of his risk awareness, where you can ask him questions like, should the outriggers be fully deployed? And the answer to the question is obviously yes, but he could probably say yes, but then he's also asked, are you sure or are you not sure? So maybe he says, I'm sure. Or in some other case, can you actually go beyond the safe working load? And the answer is no, but let's say he says, I am sure, and he says, I can go beyond at 25%. So these responses are really tabulated. And when you get this, there's an algorithm that captures and lets this individual know what is his risk competency. In other words, where does he figure when it comes to his competency? There's a little index that uncovers this. And what it actually does is very simply, it tries to go back and see, are you somebody who says that you know the answer and you give the right answer, which puts you in that band of conscious awareness, which puts you as a low risk person? Or are you an individual who thinks you know what it is, but actually don't know, which is an unconscious ignorance, which actually makes you a high risk person at work? So these are things where you should know where you stand. An individual should know where he or she stands, because that's how this individual can essentially know that my risk awareness or risk competency level needs to improve. Or you could be having a situation where somebody is plain lucky, or in some cases they know, and fortunately they at least know that they don't know the answer. So depending on all of those things, the algorithm computes and tells you where you are. And you can also go back and see how does it look for a specific activity. So you can go back and say that, how are we with respect to, let's say, the safety orientation for the construction? And because we gave one answer right and wrong, you see the combination which gives me the green and red. But otherwise, you get a rainbow there which shows where you stand with respect to competency. And at the institutional level, you can also monitor that and say, how are we doing as an organization? So this is something which I think is extremely important. Understand where those competency gaps are. Understand where your individuals are. Are they high-risk individuals at work? Are they low-risk? Don't do this just at the operational level. Do this at all levels, because if you don't have that risk competency and a knowledge of what is the risk competency in your organization, I think we are likely to be putting ourselves in a great deal of risks. So those are the 3 C's that I want to talk about again: controls, capacity, controls, and competency. So how do you put these 3 C's into action? So I have a very simple way to explain this. You need to look back at the operating system, a safety operating system, which could be really a combination of your people safety, process safety, and product safety, your occupational safety or your process safety or product safety. So as an example, you could be talking about the ILO standards or ISO 45000, which are really those occupational health and safety standards. Or you could be talking about the OSHA's process standards or the CCPS process elements. So you have the process elements, which talks about asset integrity, training, and other aspects. But don't ignore product certification, because you could be having process and people safety taken care of, but what about products? So you probably need those listed products, whether it's a kite mark or a UL listed mark. And these are just examples, by the way. So this is how an operating system should be. It's really about having focus on all of these things, but you can't look at this as a silo, because what you need to do is really see that how can we integrate these 3 things and ideally have a system where you can blend them and have a combination of all of these things operating. That's really a perfect operating system where you've blended your occupational, product, and process safety. But that's not really the way it works, because in reality, we are going to be having a dynamic system which has got some vulnerabilities. And when I say vulnerabilities, you have the people thing taken care of, but you may be having issues with your product and process. So there is a certain degree of vulnerability. Ideally, you should be sitting here where all the systems are all intact and you have a very resilient system in place. But that's not necessarily what it is. And a dynamic system really means, in some cases, and I think Simon alluded to the point that it is a changing system. Indeed it is. And that's why you probably have a system where sometimes the process takes over, sometimes it's product. So this is a dynamic system which has got multiple vulnerabilities and it's always changing. So the question is, what do we do in times of crisis? Because at times of crisis, the rate of change of a safety operating system accelerates. So that's why I think it's extremely critical that when we are, and this has been one of the biggest light bulb moments for me with this crisis, we've always been obsessed with standard operating procedures. I think these are great when you're operating under normal conditions, but when we operate in dynamic conditions, I think we always need to see how can we complement standard operating procedures with dynamic operating procedures. A standard operating procedure alone may not suffice. That's my biggest takeaway from being in the systems area and being in standards. I think this is one of the things that I've learned from this crisis. Well, So my summary, the 3 key takeaways from my perspective: 1, safety is not about the absence of accidents or illness. It's really about the presence of capacity, controls, and competency. Second thing is you need to blend process, people and product safety considerations to have a holistic operating system. And lastly, in a dynamic operating situation, we definitely need to have dynamic operating procedures to complement your standard operating procedures. I'm going to leave you with one last thought. Even if you don't remember anything out of this conversation, I just want you to keep one thing in mind, that if you don't do it yet, have a mechanism whereby you're monitoring the individual and organizational risk competency. If you can make this one of the leading indicators in your organization, it can make all the difference between a resilient and a non-resilient organization. And that's what I think is the big difference. I think I would have done a poll again to see if there was any change in these answers, but since most of you already disagreed, I'm going to skip that. And I kind of pass the floor over to Simon for any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, JC. Yeah, that was also in my mind. Would your poll have changed at the end compared to at the beginning? That was a really comprehensive overview and a lot to think about. And just to let people know that the slides will be available on the UNAIDO website at the end of this session, so you can follow up separately. Perhaps an initial question for me. I mean, very sort of strong and detailed prescriptive approach, I suppose, to safety. Is there a role for a behavior-based approach to safety that fits alongside, what you're talking about, JC, please?
That's an interesting question, Simon. I think my answer to that would be that, well, I think it's all about competency, because my belief is that there's really nobody who wants to go to work wanting to get injured or, create trouble unless one has either mental health issues or some kind of suicidal tendencies, in which case I think it's a different subject altogether. But I think normally everybody wants to go there and do a good job. And it's really about we as managers and leaders and educators to make sure that we make them aware of the consequences of something going wrong. So which is why I always say that it's not about behavior, it's about the knowledge and competency that people need to have. And so long as you as an organization are giving them that knowledge and competencies and keeping them and monitoring their risk competency, behavior is not really the issue to go after. So I'm not a big fan of the whole philosophy of BBS where you try to catch somebody doing something wrong. This is all about giving people the knowledge and education and making sure that they have the necessary tools to make sure that they stay safe.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So as I say, an awful lot of detail there, and I'm sure lots of people will be interested in following up with you afterwards. So yeah, JC's details are available on the website.